Hey there, students. This is Mrs. Velasquez, and I'm here today with one of our first flip lectures for World War I. And today's flip lecture, we're going to title it M.A.I.N, which is also referring to our underlining causes of World War I. Now, you can see on the screen right now, we have World War I. I also want you guys to be familiar with that as historians, we also refer to World War I as the Great War. Now, when we first start talking about World War I or the Great War, in the beginning, of course, we didn't know there was going to be a World War II. So in hindsight, most historians at the time or people living through that period refer to it as the war, the Great War, the war to end all wars. The years for the war you can see on the screen right now are going to be between the years of 1914 and 1918. And I also put on the screen for us to connect back to our standards. So we're trying to address standard 10.5, in which students analyze the causes and the course of the First World War. We're trying to arguments for entering the war presented from different leaders. We're trying to understand the role of political, economic rivalries, ethnic and ideological conflicts, domestic discontent, disorder, propaganda, which is one of our vocab terms, nationalism, and try to mobilize and promote the civil population to support this total war between these years. So you can see on the screen we have the acronym M.A.I.N. So looking at M.A.I.N, M.A.I.N is just a trick for help us to remember the main underlining causes of World War I. It's very simplistic, but it does the trick. So you can see on the screen right now we have M, which stands for militarism, military buildup. We also see A stands for alliances. I stands for imperialism, and N will stand for nationalism. Now, the first one to take a look at will be M, which is military buildup. And military buildup, we see that between countries during this time period, directly tied to our discussion of the Industrial Revolution. Of course, remember we studied the period in which, again, machines, manufacturing, technology built products for Europeans, and again when we looked at imperialism, selling those products and looking for resources. But one of the things that Europeans invested in, of course, was advanced weapons and technology, invested in their military, and on the screen right here you can see growth in armaments as well as their, that includes their army as well as their navy. In this case, there was a dramatic buildup in which countries felt like they needed to sort of stockpile and be prepared, and almost kind of created a culture of paranoia. We see in this time period, Europeans, they know that their next door neighbor, their rival, their competitive European power also is investing in this technology. So the fear, of course, is, well, if they're building up their army, their military, what have you, we better be prepared just in case when and if there's a future conflict. This also kind of lends itself to why we see the buildup of alliances or friendships. Okay, think about it. If you know that your neighbors or enemies might have weapons that they could use against you, you want to make sure you have someone, an alliance, a friend, a team, someone that would have your back in case there was this upcoming conflict. And a lot of European countries actually were, some historians would argue, kind of looking for a conflict. In a lot of ways, and during this time period, we see that actually European countries thought there was this culture of like, war was actually going to be good for a country. Reminder, we haven't really discussed war or revolutions for some time. For the most part, we saw a period of really countries moving towards that industrial model and that race for colonies. So war was something that this generation, is sort of existed in the history books. World War I is going to be truly the first modern warfare in which, again, Europeans will have to struggle and basically navigate through using this new technology, new style of warfare. Now you can see on the screen right now, one of the documents we looked at, you can see the different camps or different alliances. You can see that growth in which these European countries invested over the course of 1890, 1900, 1910, 1914. You can see Army and Navy. Now, of course, the two that really stand out as well will be the British and the Germans. Now, think back even to our discussion of imperialism. We talked about how the British and the Germans were constant rivals. Britain was a strong military power, always a dominant power. Reminder, was also leading the way in colonies. One of the quotes we used was, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," because they had colonies in China, or Africa, I should say. They had control in China, colonies in Africa. They had control over India. So we see that, during this time period, British always maintained their naval superiority, but other countries were also looking to compete because they wanted the prestige. They wanted to be known as that strong military power, that strong naval power. And again, like I said earlier, they're also looking as a matter of self-defense. The second one we can take a look at in Maine. So after we look at M for militarism, we look at A for alliances. And so the document on our screen right now, you can see sort of the two camps or two alliances that begin during this time period. We see that alliances, again, are treaties, agreements, commitments that countries pledge to each other. And we see that the first alliance begins around 1882, which is the Triple Alliance. And we see that the Triple Alliances can consist of Germany, Austria-Hungary Empire, and Italy in this case. And then the second alliance we're going to see in place will be 1907, which will be the alliance between, again, England, Great Britain, United Kingdom, France, and also Russia on the screen. Now, in one perspective, actually, these countries thought perhaps that the alliance would actually promote peace. The mindset was that each country would be protected by others in case of war, so it would be foolish for countries to engage in war because they know that someone necessarily would have their back and it would escalate the conflict. So why would you pick a fight with, for example, Germany when you know it would necessarily cause their alliances to come into power? So it was actually thought in the mindset of some political thinkers that this was a way to deter or actually prevent the war. Now, the danger of the alliances, of course, was an argument between two countries could draw other nations, ally them into a fight. And this is exactly what we're going to see happening when we start looking into summer of 1914, when the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente will come together and we start looking at the spark or the trigger, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. After looking at M for militarism, A for alliance, we also look at I for imperialism. Another cause of World War I was again the fact that these colonies or these countries were competing in a period known as imperialism. And we talked about previously in the last unit, again, imperialism means those strong industrialized countries looking for competition, exercising political, social, economic control over various parts of the world. The purpose of imperialism for Europeans were to build up national wealth, influence of owning colonies. We explored the 5 motives: political motivation, economic motivation. We also tied in the European ideological mindset that the white race was superior, social Darwinism, that actually, according to Europeans, they were helping, teaching, or supporting the people around the world. If we're starting to talk about the concept of paternalism, giving or providing without providing rights. Both France and Britain had many colonies again, we studied Africa and parts of Asia. And we see, again, more European countries such as Germany, such as Italy, sort of jump in, and we see that global competition that led to multiple conflicts around the globe in this case. This particular cartoon that we see on the screen right now, this is actually a German cartoon. We see that octopus kind of figure, another cartoon we've seen before. And the title of it is Freedom of the Seas. And the translation that's at the bottom right here, it refers to England, the blood-sucker of the world. So this kind of goes back to, again, that very strong competition at the time between Germany and Britain, in which both of them were trying to necessarily get that top position. And from the German perspective, they're looking at, again, the British, they're taking, they're seizing, they're not allowing that free exploration, and they're the ones sort of sucking up the colonies and resources. So the discussion of imperial competition is a major reason why we lead to that sort of buildup of World War I. And also going back to our standard, imperialism is another reason why this truly is a world war. Because as we get into talking about fighting and conflict, we're going to see the European powers are going to call their colonies to fight in the conflict. So we're looking at, involving China, involving India, involving parts of Africa. So it again goes beyond just what we see those European countries fighting with each other. All right, and the last one, going back to Maine, looking at militarism, alliances, imperialism, and the last one, N, is going to stand for nationalism. And here we see again another political cartoon in this case. We see Britain as the top dog. Remember, we looked at the bulldog, kind of, on the attack, very strong, very aggressive. And we also see the little dogs, again, the body positioning we talked about, looking at, they're sort of facing out South Africa, India, Canada, Australia. This whole concept in which they're building empire, this concept that, again, they believe that they have pride in their country, that their own nation or their own culture is superior to all others. So nationalism, again, simple definition, it means pride in your nation. The other thing I would like to introduce as well when we talk about nationalism, we also see that it also gave groups of subjective people the ideas of forming independent nations of their own. So this area on the map we see right now, we refer to it in class as the powder keg. This was an area on the map that we go back farther in history, we see was previously controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And as the Ottoman Empire was slowly sort of, weaning its way out, we see that this area is like a hot spot, because you can see on the key right there, you have various different ethnic groups. So reminder, if you're using the term ethnic group, you're talking about a group that shares a common history, usually a common language, a common religion. So different than the conversation of race. So race, we're talking about just physical characteristics, black, white, what have you, but ethnic identity is referring back to culture. So Serbians, Czechs, Slovaks, Bosnians, and many other people living under the rule of the Ottoman Empire, or again, we start looking at the Austrian-Hungarian empires, they also wanted freedom from foreign rule. They wanted sort of that national pride in which their ethnic group, their own nation of people, could necessarily have their own country. So nationalism is another reason, especially when we start talking about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Okay, so let's go ahead and just go back to the screen in this case. So just a quick reminder, in your notes and on your documents, you can again write down our discussion of our 4 main causes. We're talking about military buildup, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Historians would argue, again, these are sort of the bubbling causes. So when a small but significant event sparks or triggers, we're going to see that the whole world will erupt into this global conflict known as World War I. All right, so this concludes our flip lecture. I look forward to seeing you guys soon in class.